All opinions expressed on any program are those of the producer and or persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of DCTV. All producers and guests appearing on programs provide information and opinions based on information they consider to be reliable. DCTV does not affirm the completeness and accuracy. All DCTV members agree to adhere to DCTV's statement of compliance and are participants in a community medium forum where they're exercising their freedom of speech.
Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Hudis, in this series on the network of global corporate control. Today's segment is pre-recorded and is called Crisis of Truth. Thanks to DCTV, Carmen Stanley, studio producer and director, Cruce Starnes, prompter, Jamie Fain, audio, Dolores Harris, floor director. The network of global corporate control is a big conglomerate that owns and controls many companies on the capital markets and issues the world's paper currencies. 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology, Vitaly Glatfelder and Battiston, proved the existence of the network of global corporate control by looking at who owned the 43,000 companies traded on the world's capital markets, and found that the same directors were appointed to the boards and that the network of global corporate control had done this so that they exercised 10 times the control that they were actually entitled to. Let me summarize what happened last week. I told you that we are in a dialogue and that it's our relationship that matters. I like to keep things focused, so it's not too overwhelming for the people who are just now catching on. I started noticing that things were very corrupt and that there were serious lies when I was doing my job in the World Bank's legal department. I deliberately went to the World Bank because I cared about all the problems during the Vietnam War protests in America. I thought that the World Bank was in the center of things. It turns out that I was right, because the World Bank and International Monetary Fund are where the world is supposed to agree on what happens to the world's wealth. All of the world's monetary gold, gemstones, artworks, and bonds worth $2 quadrillion owed by the central bankers were deposited at the World Bank and International Monetary Fund in a trust called the Global Debt Facility at the end of World War II by José Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos, his lawyer. The World Bank and the IMF were created by José Rizal and Ferdinand Marcos for that special reason. The world's central bankers hate the World Bank and IMF because they know full well why the World Bank and IMF were created. In an early DCTV segment, and again on July 10th, I told you that the conference that began the World Bank and IMF in 1944 voted to close the Bank for International Settlements. That's called the BIS, which is the organization of 60 central banks. That is what we, together with the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF, are now doing. We're closing the BIS. I got my information about how the conference that began the World Bank and IMF voted to close the BIS from Valentin Katasonov, who's an eminent Russian economist. How are we going to close the central banks? I just finished telling you that these central bankers, including the United States Federal Reserve, owe us, that is, the trust managed by the World Bank and IMF called the Global Debt Facility, $2 quadrillion. I have recorded this debt with the Secretaries of State in the states where the Federal Reserve Banks are located. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago is where the Federal Reserve Bank's main activities are carried out. the Fed moved its main activities from New York to Chicago in 2015. Funny, 2015 is the year that I recorded these liens. Jesse White, Secretary of State for Illinois, thought he could invalidate this lien in 2015. All of the countries have already told Jesse White that he was out of line and he had no authority to do that. And you should see page 8 in the teleprompter, where I've showed you that Jesse White, his letter where he was declaring the lien that I put on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago invalid. And Jesse White is now bankrupt under a commercial lien that I and the Global Debt Facility are holding. Jesse White tried calling me on the phone, and when I returned his call, he never called me back. Are you starting to get the picture? Jesse White is in a crisis of truth. The morning when I recorded this segment, I tweeted that we are now in a crisis of truth. Already last year, I said that we were in a crisis of truth. What has happened in the last year? That's that the banking cartel has tried to confuse everyone. It seems to me that the banking cartel's corruption has only become more evident in this last year. The tweet says that there's a huge gap between the official and actual reality. It then goes on to say that the banking cartel never thought they would be exposed. Then the tweet says Twitter is pretending that nobody noticed how Donald Trump is not the real president of the U.S. and that the U.S. military is following their oath of office and ignoring the treasonous brass. I think we're making progress and time is on our side, not on the side of the banking cartel. It was in November 2017 that the Marine Expeditionary Unit attacked the CIA's branch office in Langley. The CIA's headquarters is in Switzerland. The U.S. military knows these facts, that the Constitution of 1789 is not in effect. The U.S. bankruptcy of 1933 is in the Federal Register, exactly where James Traficant pointed it out. Quote, "We're in a crisis of truth in almost every area. There's a huge gap between official reality and actual network of global corporate control. The banking cartel never thought they would be exposed or that humanity would," and then there's 3 dots. And you can also read the oath of commissioned officers. The latest DCTV video is very popular. Meanwhile, Twitter is pretending that nobody noticed how I exposed that Donald Trump is not the real president of the U.S., as the United States is now in Interregnum, and as the U.S. military ignores the treasonous brass and follows their oath of office. Let's get back to the U.S. Constitution. Why is nobody able to answer the point that I raise, that the U.S. Constitution of 1789 is not in effect? Judge Gorsuch and the rest of the Supreme Court are covering up this truth. And there's a broken link which shows the letter that Judge Gorsuch didn't answer about secret martial law. The morning that this segment was taped, I pointed out another crisis of truth for the banking cartel. Who has control over the world's wealth? Hint, it's us and not the bankers. The bankers keep on trying to steal back the world's wealth. This is not working for the bankers. It just emphasizes the fact that they're not in control of this wealth. It also makes it clear that as Overseer Mandate Trustee of the Global Debt Facility, I speak for the Board of Governors on the board of the World Bank and IMF in keeping the crooks at bay. It's for the Board of Governors of the World Bank and IMF to authenticate withdrawals of the money in the Global Debt Facility. The Board of Governors have the power to say who has access to the gold in the global debt facility. The morning that we taped this segment, a crook, who I already asked to stop contacting me, sent me another email. Then my response kept landing in my drafts folder after I pushed the send button to answer his email. I tweeted my response and sent my response using a different email account. The contact page on my website is linked to my Hotmail account. It's clear that the banking cartel is responding with disdain to the overseer mandate trustee and all of humanity that I'm representing. This is going to change sooner or later. And I'm going to read you an email that I sent on the 21st of August to the person who was trying to steal the world's wealth. Subject: contact details. I already published your attempt to steal humanity's patrimony and asked you not to contact me again. You keep contacting me using my website. I will use the delete button instead. Another attempt to steal the world's gold and other assets in the global debt facility was foiled. My Hotmail account refused to send the email and kept putting it in my draft folder. Another Microsoft account refused to log me in using a valid password, and I had to reset my password. It's clear that the banking cartel is responding with disdain to the overseer mandate trustee and all of humanity that I'm representing. This is going to change sooner or later. We see what they're trying to do. Their corruption is on center stage. They're not making any progress. This is only backfiring. I'm posting this and sending my response to, and this is the email account of the man who sent me his email trying to steal the world's monetary gold reserves. We're at a very interesting moment in the global currency reset. We're changing gears. I'll tell you about some other times when we changed gears so that you'll find this moment just another milestone and you'll gain confidence in our further progress. As I've said before, everything we want to accomplish will eventually fall into place. It's just a matter of time. I started out fighting the corruption in the World Bank's legal department without knowing about the world's assets deposited at the end of World War II with the World Bank and IMF. I knew there was corruption and that we were going to clean up the corruption eventually. I kept going to the U.S. Congress and Department of the Treasury. Apart from Senator Lugar, the rest of the people I found in U.S. Congress were not fighting the corruption at the World Bank. I have now found out it's because the rest of the people in Congress are all corrupt. I found out about the assets in the global debt facility from Wolfgang Struck. Then Wolfgang wanted me to assign him all the Treaty of Versailles bonds worth $2 quadrillion. I said no. I found out a lot of information from Bengt Carlson. Then Bengt started working with Wolfgang. I knew that we were only dealing with even more corruption. I told Bengt Carlson about a year ago that I didn't trust him, and then I cut off contact with these controlled opposition. Remember, controlled opposition are people who tell you a lot of true things, but keep the most corrupt things hidden from you. I'm putting in the teleprompter when I cut off contact with Bengt. It was on the 17th of August. And I wrote, "Think of stepping stones across a pond." After hearing back from people who are reading what I post on my social media, I learned where the stepping stones to the global currency reset are. There are other ways I learn where the stepping stones are. Useful tweets sometimes just pop up on my computer screen. I have to use critical thinking to recognize them. I put one definition of critical thinking at the end of this tweet, and I'm going to read it to you. Here are some stepping stones to the global currency reset. And Bengt wrote gatekeepers on the internet. And that's what I call this, to Bengt Carlson. And I told him, I said, too late. The baton already went to humanity, and they know where to find me. Critical thinking is self-guided, self-disciplined thinking, which attempts to reason at the highest level of quality in a fair-minded way. People who think critically consistently attempt to live rationally, reasonably, empathetically. They're keenly aware of the inherently flawed nature of human thinking when left unchecked. They strive to diminish the power of their egocentric and sociocentric tendencies. They use the intellectual tools that critical thinking offers, concepts and principles that enable them to analyze, assess, and improve thinking. They work diligently to develop the intellectual virtues of intellectual integrity, intellectual humility, intellectual civility, intellectual empathy, intellectual sense of justice, and confidence in reason. They realize that no matter how skilled they are as thinkers, they can always improve their reasoning abilities, and they will at times fall prey to mistakes in reasoning, human irrationality, prejudices, biases, distortions, uncritically accepted social rules and taboos, self-interest, and vested interest. They strive to improve the world in whatever ways they can and contribute to a more rational, civilized society. At the same time, they recognize the complexities often inherent in doing so. They avoid thinking simplistically about complicated issues and strive to appropriately consider the rights and needs of relevant others. They recognize the complexities in developing as thinkers and commit themselves to lifelong practice towards self-improvement. They embody the Socratic principle, the unexamined life is not worth living, because they realize that many unexamined lives together result in an uncritical, unjust, dangerous world. If time remains, I'm going to speak about recognizing mind control. And I think time does remain, so let me tell you about that. I was just discussing that earlier today. The thing about mind control is that you have to recognize when you're thinking inside your own mind, sometimes that voice that you're hearing may not be authentically yours, because there is military technology which has the capability of reaching out inside your mind. It's like hypnosis, and some people are more susceptible to it than others. But once you know that this capability exists, you have to examine your own thoughts. You have to think to yourself, why would you be thinking something if it doesn't make sense? Perhaps that's not your own thought. Perhaps that's the military technology. And I gave you earlier in another segment an example of this. When I was in Japan, I kept having this wonderful idea that I should go to the military base in Japan. And that was the last place I needed to go. Once I realized that this technology exists, I have to think through my thoughts. And it's also a rude awakening, because if you ever wanted privacy, it should be in your own mind. And then it turns out, no, that's not true at all. And this technology uses EKGs. People know when your mind is firing something, when the electrons are firing something. They can figure out what you're probably thinking. It's not watertight, but they've been working on this for a very long time. And so what that means is that your thoughts are not just kept to yourself. And so I can tell you, I've lost any semblance of being able to think on my own privately. I know that people are using their technology to figure out what it is I'm thinking about. And so I try, when there are very difficult decisions, I try to talk through these decisions with other people to recognize something that I may not have considered myself. Because one of the capabilities of this mind control is that in addition to having an actual thought, you'll have a sense of urgency, or in some cases you'll have a sense of something being a wonderful idea. And then when you step back and think about it, you decide, no, that actually is not such a wonderful idea. And you realize that that's probably the military technology that's at work. And when you're living with other people, and these people happen to be very sensitive to the mind control technology, it's extremely difficult, because if you try to talk to them about the fact that they may be having thoughts that are not their own thoughts, that's when they will run out of the room, that's when they'll get violent. So when you realize that you're dealing with somebody who's very susceptible to this, this warfare, it's warfare technology, you have to be very, very careful. You have to censor yourself. You have to realize that they're not themselves, and you have to cut them a lot of slack. It's not easy, actually. It's very difficult. You have to have a great deal of self-control. And one of the things working at the center is that I've been in touch with people who have put me in touch with other people who are helping me. They're helping to calm the people that are my family members that are very susceptible to this mind control. So I'm surrounded actually by people who are working not in my best interest, although they're very close to me, and it's extremely painful actually. Your whole sense of self is challenged, and your sense of intimacy is challenged, because you realize that the people who you love are being worked on by this technology. But because this technology is so advanced, and the people that are fighting this technology have been fighting it for a long time, we actually have a pretty good handle on it. And just to give you a brief introduction of what you need to do is you need to reach out to 3 or 4 other individuals and work with them. And that's going to help you, because the people that are using this weaponry don't like when somebody is being helped by a group of other people that know them very well. That's very evident. I also want to tell you what happened about 3 or 4 years ago when I went to what you call a brown bag lunch. There are people who are extremely advanced in the paranormal. They're not in this country. They're in. It was from another country. So although I say that we're all working together, some of us have capabilities that have been developed, and it's not going to be easy in the transition. We're going to find out who these people are and what these capabilities are, and it's going to take us a while to develop defenses for these capabilities. But it's also very clear that we're not here to be dominated. Nobody wants to be dominated. We've had a very good taste of being dominated, and there are enough of us working together that any group that tries to use their advanced technologies or their advanced capabilities to dominate are going to find that that they're outnumbered, because, as I said, we all are working together. And that is why I talk about a peaceful transition. I actually don't know from one minute to the next how people are going to be reacting to what I say. And of course, everybody then reacts to the other people that are reacting. We're in a situation where there are multiple layers of dominoes that are all falling. So we do know, because of the power transition model, where we will end up, but we don't know when, we don't know how. But we do know that we are all working together to end world domination of the banking cartel. And the banking cartel knows very well that we know this. In this segment, called Crisis of Truth, I'm showing you some of the times when I had to choose truth and recognize that the people who I was working with and I were on different sides of the truth. What you need to prevent at all costs is parting company with yourself. You always want to remain true to yourself. As Polonius says to Laertes in Shakespeare's Hamlet, "This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man."